Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and Federation citizens use the metric system, so they don't know what a quarter pounder is. They also don't know what a quarter is because they don't have money. My guest on the show today is Alison Pitt. Alison is an audio producer, editor, and a voiceover artist. She's also the host of Daily Star Trek News on the Roddenberry Podcast Network, bringing you Star Trek news in podcast form every weekday. Alison, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's great to finally have you here. Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about the Royale, the 12th episode of the second season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Genre fiction has historically gotten a bad rap when compared with its cooler, more cultured sibling, literary fiction. After all, literature has The Great Gatsby and Don Quixote and Pride and Prejudice, while genre is stuck with Goldfinger and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and Twilight. But as fiction has evolved and the novel has hatched into radio, film, television, and numerous other media, genre fiction has risen to take its place alongside literary fiction as a respected peer, being equally insightful and sophisticated while remaining committed to imagination and inclusivity. And yes, that includes even you, Teen Wolf. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, Alison, it's great to have you here. And I always ask first-time guests to the show how they first discovered Star Trek. How did you become a Star Trek fan?
That's a good question. I don't actually know. It's just sort of always been around. Probably my earliest memories of Star Trek are when I was early teen. I used to just watch it like twice a day because it was on in the early afternoon and then it was on again in the evening, like after dinner time. Yeah. And they used to do this thing. So the early one would play one episode and then after dinner they'd play the next episode. And then the next day, the early one would be the later one from the day before.
Yeah, right.
And then they'd play the next one. And I used to watch both of those. So I'd watch the same episode twice. I was just obsessed. I don't know. That I specifically remember. My parents have told me that they used to watch the original series like when I was littler, like at dinner.
Okay.
And to this still sometimes will watch an episode of the original series that I don't really remember, but then I'll go, wait, that looks familiar. It's weird. So yeah, probably the watching it twice a day is probably the earliest. And I don't know why it just caught me. I can't describe any particular reason why. I
wonder if the original series, and I guess definitely TNG as well, if they had been like, remember how like comic book films, when they first came out in like the 90s and the 2000s, they all had to be like cool, like washed out aesthetic, black leather costumes and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I wonder if Star Trek had looked like that and not the kind of 4-color day-glow fantasy that it presented. I wonder if I would have been attracted to it in the same way, you know, like if that sort of draws in the kiddies and then the deeper philosophical explorations of humanity is like what keeps adults around for it. But I've noticed that as well.
That's a really interesting question, actually. I wish that I could remember my mentality when I was a kid, because probably I can imagine as a child that I would have been attracted by the colors. And of course, you don't get the deeper meaning. You don't get the nuance about like Kodos the Executioner. It's like, you don't get that nuance. But of course, that's appealing to the grown-ups, whereas the kid, like many Disney movies, where you have this sort of two-layered thing going on with the spectacle versus the actual content. So I wonder.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure anybody remembers when they were that young, like what they were actually thinking, except I'm hungry and why won't mom go let me play?
Maybe if Earth Final Conflict, it would have done better if everybody was wearing single color T-shirts or something like that on it.
Yeah, maybe.
And you lived in the UK for a long time, is that right?
I did, yeah. So I lived in the UK for about 15 years. I didn't grow up there. I moved there as an adult, and I just recently. I say recently, it was like 3 years ago now. End of 2016, I moved back here to the States. I actually moved over there just after 9/11.
Okay.
So I have this really weird dissonance in my brain because I spent a long time remembering America before 9/11.
Yeah.
This is a common thing that I understand happens to expatriates of any country, immigrants, that You remember how your country was before you left.
Yeah.
And you end up almost being more fundamentalist because like have this vision of purity of what your country used to be like. And then when you actually find out what it's like, it's very different. It was a really big cultural shift, a cultural adjustment when I moved back here, even though I'm American and I grew up here, but so much has changed between 2001 and 2016 that it was a big adjustment.
That's fascinating. You got the like pre 9/11 American experience, then you got to experience the post 9/11 European perception of Americans for a while, and then you got to come right back here for the new millennial experience of being an American.
Yeah. Like right in at the deep end.
Yeah, nice.
In 2016.
Well picked.
Yeah, it was an interesting adjustment. Yeah.
I always ask British nationals that come on the show about Star Trek in the UK, but now I can ask somebody who's really had the best of both worlds. Like, what's Trek fandom like in the UK?
Pun intended.
Exactly.
Sorry.
What's Trek fandom like in the UK in comparison to the US?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. Although my experience of Trek fandom was different, but that might just be because of the conventions that I went to. So I really wasn't a participant in the Trek fandom before about 2014 in the UK. So it's, I wasn't going to conventions. I wasn't involved in any fan clubs or anything. I got into it again because of Star Trek Online. And then the people that I was interacting with in Star Trek Online were a mix. They're from all over the world.
Sure.
So, and then I went to my very first, believe it or not, Star Trek convention in 2014. And it's different. Destination Star Trek is the two really big worldwide conventions really are Star Trek Las Vegas and Destination Star Trek.
Right.
And Destination Star Trek is totally different because it's the tickets are super cheap. But everything's a la carte. So if you want to go to a panel or a photo shoot or anything, you have to pay extra on top of that.
Right. So
it's a very different experience from, say, STLV, where it's all inclusive. So you go and then you can basically go to any of the panels that you want.
Right.
Yes, it seemed different, but I don't know whether that's just because a different company did the different conventions or not. I don't know.
Well, I guess I could switch the focus of my question then. And that's, being involved in Star Trek Online. That's for somebody who is not necessarily eating, breathing, thinking about Star Trek all the time. That's a dive into the deep end of Star Trek canon because so much of the content there is drawn from so many parts and shows in the Star Trek franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a massive high regard for the writers and the producers at Star Trek Online. They did, before Discovery came on the scene, they were Star Trek and they did a fantastic job of furthering that story. And I can't speak highly enough of that team. I deliberately didn't join Star Trek Online when it came out. I'd heard of it. I think it started in 2010, I think. Yeah, because this is their 10th anniversary this year. Okay. I deliberately did not download that game because I knew that I would love it. And I can tell you right now, if you haven't played it before and you decide to download it and go in, what will get you is that you will land on Earth space dock and your mind will just melt because you come off the transporter in Earth space dock and it's the sounds of Earth space dock. I mean, it sounds like you're on, put on big old headphones and it's just this immersive sound and you are in Star Trek, and then you can walk around and everyone's in uniform and whoa. Then you start to get into the end game people that have designed really strange aliens and stuff, gone really customized and stuff. And then you realize, okay, it's still an MMO.
Yeah. Right.
But that first shock to the system of, oh my God, I'm in Star Trek is kind of I still love it. I don't play it as much anymore because I'm quite busy most of the time. Yeah. But when I do dive in there, it's the sounds, the visuals on it it blow me away.
That's cool. How long have you been doing daily Star Trek news now?
What day is today? Almost exactly a year.
Okay.
Yeah, which is why I was like, what day is it? Okay. So technically the first episode I ever recorded was on the 10th of April of last year. that episode will never see the light of day.
Okay, sure.
Beyond my computer.
Yeah.
I'm sure as somebody who does podcasts, you understand. The first one that I actually published was on the 23rd of April. So it hasn't quite been a full year, but it's been just about.
That would be a good Patreon extra, maybe, for the highest tier. It's like, you can hear my temp shows.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. We'll see.
And then stop being a patron and quit.
Well, so what's interesting is sort of my initial concept was actually that it was going to be much more off the cuff and improvised. Mm-hmm. So the first several shows that I did, I took headlines and I improvised them, knowing that I would, cut it and produce it into a show. Yeah. I ended up not going down that route, first of all, because like my former colleagues at Priority One will tell you I'm terrible at improvising.
Okay, well, that too.
That's why my whole show is scripted. But also part of it was testing the concept of, how much exposure can I get with one set of content. So for me, it works much better to script it, because that script becomes my blog post, it becomes my social media post, Sure. It becomes my newsletter. Yeah. So it's I get a lot more value out of it, taking the extra time to script it ahead of time. So yeah, so that's mostly why those shows will never go out, because they're I don't know, they might be interesting. They are edited. They're just sort of a little bit more off the cuff than what it currently is.
Sure. Where'd the idea for the show come from? Why did you get the bug to deliver Star Trek news?
Well, I'm sort of in my real life, I'm sort of a process person. I'm fascinated by process and process management and how to make things more efficient. And, I am interested in SEO and, all sorts of things. And really it was sort of, I saw a niche in the sort of Star Trek podcast field that wasn't currently being filled, which was basically just hardcore news in a short format.
Sure.
And so I saw a space there, and I thought of a way to do it, and I just really wanted to do it, and so I did it. Yeah. I don't know if that's there's no better way to explain it. So yeah.
Well, one of the things I like about Daily Star Trek News is your impartiality about news. Like, you just deliver it and there isn't a lot of commenting on it. And that's something that you see, a lot of the information you get on the internet these days, especially about Star Trek, is all tinged with commentary, which is fine. It's people's rights as creators, but just getting to hear like, oh, okay, this is a story, or this is what's going on with this show or something. Certainly post 2017, with the advent of Discovery and CBS Trek, I'd imagine that there's a lot more news to deliver. Just for myself as a part-time news person on this program, I've experienced that. But as somebody who's reporting Trek news every day, do you ever find yourself in a position where you're like, what am I going to talk about today?
There was a period of time last summer when that was the case.
Okay.
Yeah. When I was like, wow, nothing's happening.
Things are slowing
down. But no, not really since then. But then, I've sort of adapted what I include as stories and what the threshold is for news, if that makes sense. Yeah. I thank you for saying that about impartiality. That's one of the things that I try to do, is be impartial, but fair. And I also try to not put spoilers in, because there are some people who don't or can't watch the modern Star Trek. So I try to keep that out of it too. Yeah. My idea is that, anybody could listen to the show and feel like they're keeping up to date on what's going on in the fandom and also what's going on the production side. Yeah. So honestly, we've got 53 years of history at this point with the Star Trek franchise. Yeah. And what I cover covers not only what's currently going on with, production or the current cast of Picard and Discovery doing, talking about their shows.
Yeah.
I also cover what's happening in the fandom. So we have, like I said, 53 years of actors and actresses who are having lives, and people want to keep up with what they're doing, what their new projects are, what conventions they're going to. Yeah. There's also one of the things I try to do is like elevate other fans' voices. So when I hear about people who have done something remarkable with their fandom, whether it's music, or they're organizing events, or they have just done something great for other people, I try to highlight that in my show, because I think that other Star Trek fans want to know about it. They want to feel good about their fandom. So over time, I've sort of brought all of those different elements in. And honestly, my backlog of things that I want to tell people about, but I haven't got time to write, is mammoth.
Yeah.
So I've swung the other way at this point.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, why did you choose this specific episode, the Royale, to discuss today?
Because it's really fun.
It is.
I mean, like I am definitely one of those people. Like there are episodes of Star Trek that I can appreciate that are great, that are, really important and influential. What I love most about Star Trek is that it's fun. I like all the stupid episodes. I like the ones that are a little bit goofy. I love it when they introduce humor alongside drama.
Yeah.
And the Royale is like this weird episode. I mean, it's a I don't know what genre. It's like the noir mystery, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's so like
But
cheesy
also
though.
sci-fi.
It's almost, yeah, right. But it's so cheesy. It's almost just like it's pulp, basically. It's just like what you'd think of as a pulp novel.
Yeah, and that kind of story, I mean, and like, oh, I'm going to be one of these people, but like I find those are really, really missing from modern Star Trek. I miss them so much. I miss that whole, like, because you get those episodes when you have a series.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to produce 26 episodes.
Oh yeah, you got to do everything. Yeah.
I mean, you just have to. Some of the scripts are not that strong. A little bit like daily Star Trek news, but it's the whole, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole picture, and so the Royale is a perfect example of like, what the heck? I mean, there's nothing consequential happens. No one learns anything.
Yeah. It's weird because we've been talking about this on the show recently, which is that Trek doesn't go quote unquote funny a lot. Like it's often humorous in its dialogue and characters, but it's mainly an adventure show. It's social commentary, and it doesn't often go into broad comedy. And when it does, I think that often the lack of experience in doing that shows, because it's not always out and out hilarious. Like this episode is definitely funny, but there's other times where I know it, like Menage a Trois. I know or not Trois, it's Troy. I'm supposed to be laughing, but it's like, okay, it's funny. Hey, this is funny, everybody.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think the best of Star Trek is when they take a dramatic situation and they can inject humor. Like almost everything Worf says. I mean, he's not meant to be a comedy character.
They milk him for comedy, though.
Yeah, and yet it's just that the type of personality in the situations that they put him in, it ends up being humorous. And I think having that levity makes it relatable because, as humans, even when you're so depressed, if you put on your favorite comedy show, you'll laugh, or if something absurd happens, it'll tickle your fancy. It might not make you not depressed, but we all have that capacity. And so I think having a little bit of humor in there, just it for me makes it more realistic.
I'm not sure that Star Trek in their writer's room ever had like a comedy guy or girl. Like when I think about something like the X-Files, which is nominally very serious or at least very spooky, but then they'd have these really like funny, like sort of metatextual episodes that are kind of poking holes in the premise of the series. And a lot of them were by like Darren Morgan, which was their like, genius wunderkind writer who loved to write these like goofy, funny scripts. And maybe like Brian Fuller, I think, put a lot of comedy into Voyager, I think, when he could. But nobody else is really coming to mind is like, we're going to get a funny script out of this guy.
Yeah. Well, I think they tried to do a little bit in Discovery, although I think they leaned on Mary Wiseman a little bit too much in season 2 of Discovery for that. But I don't know, that didn't quite work. But then that material is much, much heavier, and because of that serialized format, there's not a lot of room for side quests.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They're not going off to the Royale.
They don't have time. Although I'd love to see that though, for sure. This
That'd be wonderful.
this episode holds a special place for me. I was young but not a baby when TNG was on, and we had just gotten a VCR, and so like a lot of kids who grew up in that era, you know, you have a limited number of VHS tapes that were either movies your parents had bought or things that you had taped off a TV, assuming you knew how to do that. And I bugged my parents to get me a pack of VHS tapes so I could record things off of TV. And one of the things I recorded must have been this episode, because I remember watching it over and over again when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Which is maybe not. I wish I'd got a really good episode. I don't think I watched Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2, but I think I forgot to record those. So it was just the Royale and Skin of Evil for me.
Right. Oh, that's another classic one, like classic scary monster episode.
That's true.
That was Skin of Evil is very TOS to me.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is a very TOS too, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
This episode gets weirdly invested in its side characters too, like the bellhop and Texas and Vanessa. And I had no real awareness at that age of how predatory Texas is in the episode.
Oh yeah,
it does not play well today. Yeah.
And what I find, because I was watching it, you're absolutely right. It does not play well, and one of the reasons, I mean, I remember there's a scene, and I can't remember exactly which scene it is, but Data is like watching them, trying to figure out what's going on, because he asks Tex, is it Tex or Tex? I can't remember.
Texas,
he asks him to take him to see his car, because he's trying to figure out how they can get out of the Royale.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm not going to take you to see my car. And Data's then watching him with this woman, and I would like to think that by the time we get to the 24th century, Data would be like, okay, that's gross. Can you not do that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's like a non-interference. They're trying
I'm
to figure out
programmed to
what's going
respect
on,
other
but
cultures, but yeah, there is a baseline that we can operate off of. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a little
Yeah, I just thought, oh, he's a funny guy. He's going to teach Data how to gamble. Huh? That's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're talking the TNG episode, The Royale. It was the 12th episode of the second season of Star Trek The Next Generation. It first aired on March 27th of 1989. It was written by Keith Mills, which is the writing pseudonym for TNG staff writer and creative consultant Tracy Torme. We'll get into why he used a pseudonym on the episode in just a little bit. Torme got his start writing for Saturday Night Live in the early 80s and worked on the first and second seasons of The Next Generation, where he served as an executive story editor on season 1 and a creative consultant for season 2. He went on to co-create the sci-fi series Sliders, and he wrote for the series Odyssey 5, Carnival, and the 2007 film I Am Legend. And of course, he is the son of singer, composer, and actor Mel Torme. The episode was directed by Cliff Bole, who we've talked about previously on the show. Bole also directed Conspiracy, a Torme-penned episode of TNG's first season that introduced his namesake species, the Bolians, to Star Trek. The stardate for this episode is 42625.4, and your assignment, Allison, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of The Royale.
Oh my God. Wait, does me saying "oh my God" count?
No, but if you say it was a dark and stormy night, that will count.
Yeah. Okay. There's a revolving door in the middle of nowhere on a creepy planet. The crew gets stuck inside and have to use their smarts to get out.
All right. I like that. That's kind of like a pitch.
Kind of. I feel like it underplays the level of gambling that happens in the episode.
There's a lot of gambling in the episode. No, I like that, though. A black, void, and inside a rotating door. And what's inside? Yeah. Here's some interesting facts from the memory banks about this episode. This episode was first pitched by Torme to the producers of the show. It was one of 2 scripts that actually got him his job with Trek. Torme acknowledged that the piece wasn't exactly very quote-unquote Star Trek, but he intended it to be comedic and satirical of pulp and genre fiction. His final draft was originally titled The Blue Moon Hotel, and I couldn't find any source for this, but I'm guessing that is an homage to the Stephen Crane short story, The Blue Hotel, which also features gambling and a cowboy and mysterious foreigners, but isn't funny. The episode that was shot is reportedly very different from Torme's original draft, which is what prompted him to request the use of the pseudonym Keith Mills. Showrunner Maurice Hurley didn't like the surrealism in the initial draft, and he felt that the story was too derivative of the TOS episode, A Piece of the Action. Which, yeah, I can kind of see.
I can see that. Yeah, a little bit, maybe.
But they were using TOS ideas and like actual rejected TOS scripts and Phase 2 scripts all the time in early TNG. So maybe Hurley just didn't like Torme? Hurley and Torme often clashed over story points while writing. Torme reportedly had a different relationship to the production than most writers. He was a friend of Gene Roddenberry, and his status meant that he didn't have to participate in other writers' room activities like breaking stories or rewriting scripts. He was just contracted to deliver 3 scripts a season, but he became frustrated with the, in his words, timid and safe material of the show, and he left his staff position after the production of this episode, contributing only one more script to the show, the season 2 episode Manhunt. And his original script, as mentioned, contained much more comedy and much more surreal elements in the action. It also featured a recreation of the last surviving astronaut, the dead guy that we see. He was actually alive in this simulation, living during the events of the episode. And at the end of the episode, an away team crew member, a woman who from the Enterprise who dies during the episode, would have been recreated in the Royale to keep him company. It's somewhat reminiscent of the end of The Cage, where a fantasy version of Captain Pike is created for Vina.
Right.
Which is strange. That would have been a little weird.
It would have been different.
And somebody dying at the very beginning would put a damper on the comedy for sure. But, but it's Star Trek. Somebody's going to die. Also, I've seen this 100 times, but I never thought about this until this last watch. But an astronaut being whisked away from our solar system by unknowable aliens and living out his life in a simulated environment of well-appointed rooms and then dying in bed. That's the end of 2001.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's what happens to Dave Bowman. Well, until he becomes the Star Child. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It's almost like that's an influential film or something.
Well, maybe.
Weird.
It was kind of like Caretaker, I thought, too, the pilot of Voyager. Like, Voyager is whisked to the other side of the galaxy by this alien. Turns out that, we didn't have what he needed, and so he's sorry that he inconvenienced us, and he's going to let us live in a Country Time Lemonade commercial for the rest of our lives. Which, of course, is not good enough for the Voyager. They're going to go home.
No, because that kind of stuff it's not good. You want fresh squeezed.
Right. Yeah. Too much banjo music for me. We got to get out of here. A discussion of Fermat's last theorem forms a sort of frame for this episode. The algebraic problem, which I won't pretend to understand, was proposed by Pierre de Fermat in 1637, and it resisted all solutions. Captain Picard implies that Fermat's theorem remained unsolved in the 24th century, but little could the writers of Trek know that Oxford University professor Andrew Wiles would indeed publish a solution to the problem in 1995. The third season DS9 episode Facets would return to Fermat's last theorem when it aired in that year, and it features Jadzia Dax claiming that her previous host, Tobin, had found one of the more elegant solutions to Fermat's theorem in the years after Wiles's proof. So TNG bet hard on that never being solved, and they kind of lost, but they got it back on DS9.
It's what's funny is that this episode occurred just not that long before they actually found a proof for that theorem, which is kind of funny because it was around for a while. Yeah. And then it was like as soon as it was put on film in TNG, they were like, "Oh wait, no, we've got it."
Yeah, maybe Andrew Wiles is just sitting around watching Star Trek and he's like, "Well, I'm going to take another crack at that thing."
Yeah. Challenge accepted.
And prove Picard wrong. If there was an internet, it would have been solved immediately. And I don't just mean because of the sort of cloud computing aspect of the internet, but they wouldn't have never written that because Andrew Wiles would have had a blog. It would have been like, my solution. He'd be working on it, and you'd be able to Google it and go, well, this guy seems like he's pretty close. But I think back then it was just, I'm sure he worked on it for a long time, but who would know about it?
Yeah, right.
The scene where Data fixes the craps die in order to win at gambling found its way into another Roddenberry production in the Questor tapes, the TV film which is meant to launch a new series. The titular android Questor performs a similar feat to that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I used to do that all the time when I was younger. I was role playing, and you get some bad rolls in your die, and then I'm like, give me that. I sort of do that. I'm kind of squeezing it, and then, all right, he's got the touch. Let's do this.
Right.
Never worked. The novel Hotel Royale begins with the line, "It was a dark and stormy night," which was originally the first line of the 1830 novel Paul Clifford by Edward Bulwer Lytton, and has become synonymous with bad or purple prose, so much so that it has launched the Bulwer Lytton Fiction Contest, sponsored by the San Jose State University English Department. The contest started in 1982 and has produced 6 book collections of its entries. 2019's grand prize winner was Maxwell Archer, and his entry reads, Space Fleet Commander Brad sat in silence, surrounded by a slowly dissipating cloud of smoke, maintaining the same forlorn frown that had been fixed upon his face since he'd accidentally destroyed the phenomenon known as time 13 inches ago.
Cute.
So there you go.
That's cute.
I think the grand prize is like $100. Let's talk about the guest stars in this episode. And you can't have a novel without characters. Sam Anderson appears in the episode as the assistant manager. Anderson has worked in TV and film for over 40 years. And he's definitely one of like those guys, actors who appear in a lot of stuff. And you see him, you say, hey, it's that guy.
Hey, it's that guy.
Yeah. Anderson had several recurring roles in 90s TV shows, including Growing Pains, Perfect Strangers, and LA Law. And he also recurred as the villainous Holland Manners of Wolfram and Hart on Angel and played survivor Bernard Nadler on ABC's Lost. Jill Jacobson appears in the episode as Vanessa. She would go on to play Shalon Arroyo in the Season 4 DS9 episode Broken Link. She is a film and TV actress, probably best known for her role as Erin Jones on the 80s primetime soap Falcon Crest. Leo Garcia appears as the bellboy. Garcia also had a recurring role on the NBC daytime soap Santa Barbara and appeared in the 1994 film Clear and Present Danger. Noble Willingham appears as Texas. Willingham, who died in 2004, appeared in over 30 feature films in his career in addition to his many TV appearances. He's best known for the role of retired Ranger C.D. Parker on the long-running series Walker, Texas Ranger. He also ran an unsuccessful bid for Congress in his native Texas's 1st congressional district in the year 2000. And Gregory Beecroft appears as Mickey D. Beecroft had a long-running stint on the daytime soap Guiding Light in the 80s. He was also a cast member of General Hospital and As the World Turns. Let's talk about the episode itself. What I got out of reading the whole thing with Tracy Torme and the history of it, and I want to say that I'm not like a Tracy Torme stan. I mean, it sounds like he was just not a fan of being rewritten. And I'm not a Maurice Hurley stan either, but I can see getting pretty frustrated with a writer that's like too cool for school. But this script and all of Torme's scripts seem to be designed to push the boundaries of the setting of the show. His episode Contagion was supposed to rock Starfleet to its core because there was actually evil admirals plotting in Starfleet. But that got changed by Hurley to neckbugs. And this episode is supposed to expose or introduce surreal elements and sort of do a metafictional examination of pulp fiction or genre TV. Mm-hmm. And the higher-ups are like, no, we just want some goofy casino hijinks, and then we're going to do another episode next week. And when it comes to something that I got a lot about reading the reactions of the writers and the director on this episode is they all sort of emphasize that idea that, well, we got to do another one of these. Like, it's fun to, like, really dig into things and really, like, ooh, what if we were all trapped in a different show this week? But they're like, yeah, but we got to build a set and we got to have costumes and we got other people coming in. We just have to kind of, it was a cute script, but we've got to kind of move on, which is somebody who produces a daily show. I'm sure you understand.
Yeah. And these, like, I'm totally fascinated by the behind the scenes production kind of stuff that, especially of the original series and of Next Generation, where a lot of times, they were holding the production together with like glue and tape, because they were working on a limited budget and limited logistics. Whereas nowadays it's, I don't want to trivialize the work that any of them do, but if you can't make a set, you green screen it and you do the set on computer. Like it's like a whole different concept of production. Yeah. And I love I love the stuff that they pulled out of nowhere that's clearly done on a small budget, limited cast. Like I love a bottle episode because they clearly are just trying to save some money and some time and keep content on the screen because they've got a deadline to hit. I love that. I love that we don't, like, back then they were still shooting the show when they were airing the show.
Oh yeah. Right.
That to me is just fantastic and wonderful. And I almost wish they would do that again. Although I think probably any TV producer nowadays would be like, are you nuts? Because now, they deliver these whole packages.
Yeah. Like multicam shows, like sitcoms and stuff probably still do that. But these shows that are 13 episodes or 16 episodes, they almost shoot it like a long movie, then just box it up and it all goes to post. And then we just go from there. One of my favorite stories about the old original series production is that the fact that they had to shoo the pigeons away before shooting because there was just birds hanging out in the studios for some reason, and so they would try to feed them like early in the day to get them out of the way, and then they would have to stop takes, and there was a PA had to run and just shoo all the birds away. And speaking of budgetary concerns, there were obviously some budgetary problems in developing this episode, but director Cliff Bull said that they knocked out a pretty convincing Vegas-style set in a really short amount of time. And he should know because he directed 13 episodes of the 1979 series Vegas. So, it's just a job for a lot of the crew, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. I think that this episode is really funny, and I also think it's funny because I think Star Trek gets kind of close to biting the hand that feeds it in this episode. I'm
not sure what you mean.
Well, what I mean is...
Can you clarify what you mean?
For most modern TV series, I think that they take themselves very seriously. We're doing very important work here. We mentioned before that Discovery is, the action is very fraught and there's very little room. There's very little cracks that you can sort of fill in with comedy. Every episode's life and death and high drama. And I think in earlier eras, like syndicated shows in the 80s, it was more like, okay, what planet are we on this week? Let's go, let's film it. And that's fine. But it seems like in crafting this shallow world of the Royale, which we're supposed to kind of deride, to me, it looks a lot like early TNG in the 80s, like the kind of wonky dialogue, the weird characterization that you see in early TNG aren't too different than the pulpy exchanges between the bellhop and the desk clerk, or the outsized, Texas the gambler. Maybe intentionally, Torme was hitting a little close to home.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah.
And, again, like I said, I mean, that's fine. I think that, it makes the show really entertaining, but it's like, when they, I love when Riker is trying to reach the ship, or he's talking to Worf, and they're very concerned about getting out of this like trap that they're in, and then we sort of pull back and, hey, you don't want to mess with Mickey D. Don't tell me what to do. She's my girl. And these little vignettes happen sort of for the benefit of the people that are there. And then they're like, what was that? What's going on here?
I just think it's wonderful the way that, this is the kind of plot. This kind of plot reminded me a little bit, actually a lot, of Doctor Who. Which is a series that I've always admired a lot because they set up this framework, the concept of the Doctor and the TARDIS, that literally they can go anywhere in time and space. So you can write whatever story you want. Yeah. And it will absolutely make sense because they have a TARDIS. Right. So that's great science fiction because you can literally make up stuff out of nowhere and it can be completely incongruous, but it still works. Mm-hmm. And this episode is a little bit like that. They're writing a schlocky noir story, straight out of like the mystery novels from like the 1920s. And having a fun time with it. They know they're having a fun time with it because they know, like they literally hold up the novel at the end of the episode.
Right. I know. What are the people like? I want to see like a follow-up episode where the assistant manager like starts flipping through the novel and he's like, "Oh my God. Oh my God."
Yeah. Yeah. But the one thing that we haven't talked about yet is the fact that there's a good sci-fi story wrapped up in there, which is kind of it's a first contact story gone wrong. So the alien beings on this planet were trying to be like, hey, come over to our house, except that our house is super toxic and you're all going to die. And we're really, really sorry. Yeah. And so the mystery, the sci-fi is basically it's like a reverse first contact thing. And they're trying to unpick this mystery at the same time this like ridiculous story is going on around them. And I think that's a wonderful framework that Star Trek doesn't use enough of because they're going all over the galaxy. Who knows what they'll encounter? Most of the time in modern day, the stuff that they encounter is going to be more or less what we've already seen over the last 53 years. Right. But the Royale is a good example of where they were like, we don't know what we're going to run into. Here's this weird planet with like a hotel on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
it makes logical sense because you don't know what's out there.
Yeah, that is it. That's true. That's a really great like 60s pulp sci-fi sort of setup, like a spaceman in a silver spacesuit with a bubble on his head coming through a revolving door, and there's dames and gangsters and stuff like that. I could see that as a cover of like a pulp novel.
Yeah.
The way that Riker realizes that they have to assume a role in the story to move freely in it is really neat, I think. And I think that this before Star Trek or really a lot of TV was doing this is sort of like a metafictional commentary on like the constructions of stories. And I think that's really cool. My practical question is though, if the aliens designed this fiction as a playground, did they really understand it? I mean, we know from the episode that they couldn't countenance the idea that a guy would get sick of a fake casino after a week.
Right.
And so he's just like, oh my God, please kill me. He probably died happy in that bed. But why would they design an exit condition? Do you know what I mean? Like, is that just a bug or is it a feature? Because once Riker figures out, well, the investors, leave, so of course now we can leave. But what if the astronaut had figured that out? Then now he's just stuck outside of a hotel for the rest of his life. They just find a skeleton outside the revolving door.
Huh. That's a really interesting question that's going to haunt me for my life now, because like I just kind of accepted it.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of cool with it. It's fine. Like I just accept that, the aliens, they literally don't understand literature. They and the things that are in that book, they can clearly understand the language. I don't know why exactly, but the things in that book, it's a little bit like in Galaxy Quest when they're like, oh, it's the historical documents.
Yeah.
And so they are trying, and they are just unable at all to synthesize the idea that this is like horrible for him.
Yeah.
But the idea of that exit condition is really fascinating. And are the alien beings aware that he's dead?
Well, yeah, it seems you get a lot of this in early TNG, is that these godlike aliens do something and they leave, and then we kind of come upon the ruins of it, like The Last Outpost or Skin of Evil or this episode. Yeah, like where are the aliens? Like check up on it. Like if the guy's been dead for 200 years, like you've never come back and went, ooh, we better take this gerbil back to the pet store.
Yeah, so I don't know. Actually, what's funny is I assumed that the aliens were there on the planet and they just like made him like a terrarium.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's what, like, I don't know if they actually specify that in the episode. I'd have to go back and watch it again. But I assumed that the aliens were actually there, just sort of watching it, like, and like they had a lizard who just hadn't moved in a while,
Yeah, right. Or maybe the exit condition was kind of the qualification for like, if you can get out of here, then we'll talk to you. But they didn't plan on human lifespan, so this guy's dead. And then Riker and the away team figure it out, leave, and 2 seconds after they dematerialize, a bunch of aliens show up like, hey, good job. Hey, there's nobody here.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, now that you say that, the astronaut, Colonel Ritchie, would never have been able to hit that exit condition because he is not a they.
That's true.
So it might be a moot point.
I suppose. In that case, then, does it just go on and on for him? Because if he'd been there for his entire life, and when the away team walks in, it's just presumably a dark and stormy night, the beginning of the novel, was it just... Is he Phil Connors? Was it just Groundhog Day for him? Like by the time he died,
I was wondering that too.
He'd done everything. He'd murdered everybody in the casino. He'd burned the place down, and it just comes back the next day.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's the tie-in fiction I want to see.
But I'm okay with that being vague. Like that to me is good science fiction. I'm glad that they didn't answer that. Contrast that to no, I'm not going to bash anybody else. But okay. I like it. It spurs conversation, for example. And you and I could probably sit here and retcon exactly what had happened and fill in all those gaps, but we don't really need to. What happened, and they moved on, and I'm okay with that.
Sure. And, Tracy Torme would hate what we came up with anyway.
Probably. That's why you and I are not TNG writers.
Yeah, or showrunners, yeah. This episode is a really neat instance of something that I think that Trek would try to do and do a lot across its various series. And I think that that's exploring narrative in a metafictional sense, or at least the use of metafictional elements to spice up the story. And just for listeners who aren't familiar with the concept of metafiction, it's using your story to comment on stories or the artificiality of fiction, often characters being aware of their role in a narrative. And that sort of thing. And obviously the holodeck is the perfect tool for that practice. Almost every time the holodeck is pulled out, it's for something like that. But I feel like the franchise had been doing that since early TOS. If you think about something like the Spectre of the Gun, I think this episode is very similar to the Spectre of the Gun. You've got your away team. They're stuck in a historical environment. They kind of have an idea how things are supposed to go, but whenever they try to break from something, in Spectre of the Gun, it's not get killed by Wyatt Earp. In this, it's just, hey, can we leave? It's like, no, you can't leave. Can we talk to the manager? He's not here. They can't escape this narrative until they find a way to kind of play through the narrative and sort of find their own solution to it. I think that that's a really interesting parallel.
Yeah.
And also, you brought up Kodos the Executioner before, and right. I was wondering, I feel like Conscience of the King is, on its surface, sort of like a metatextual thing, because the whole episode has kind of the structure of a Shakespeare play, or at least a collection of Shakespeare scenes, and it features, of course, a Shakespeare troupe in it. And so if you put Kirk in a situation where he's trying to figure out if this old guy, is or is not responsible for a murder or many murders, is it only metafictional if Kirk says, wow, I really feel like Hamlet here. Like, do you have to call attention to it? Or does it just work on its own?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. That's a hard one. Why is it always Shakespeare, by the way?
I had hoped that CBS Trek would turn this around. That, the benefits of a classical education, if you are a white male writer writing in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, Shakespeare is the height of culture for you, right? So, of course, everyone in Star Trek in the 24th century loves Shakespeare. And it hasn't changed a ton, but we do have people listening to rap music and talking about Prince and stuff like that. It's not all like classical music now. So hopefully we'll get there someday.
Yeah. Well, maybe because they didn't have the internet when they were writing. They just felt like they didn't have access to a lot of
Google any other
public domain.
Playwright. Yeah.
But there was all sorts of stuff available. They just didn't take advantage of.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I love the fact that the Enterprise computer always has everything in it. I know that they could probably tap out to some satellite that's got a bit deeper database, but they've got the Hotel Royale novel in their computer, or in Voyager in 1159 when Janeway's like, oh, my ancestor did this stuff. And then they look up in newspaper clippings in Voyager's computer that they have for some reason. They're like, well, I don't think she did that.
Yeah, all the way in the Delta Quadrant.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got really 5G.
Really, really good Wi-Fi
reception.
Out there.
Yeah. The astronauts in the episode, of course, they are red-blooded American astronauts from NASA. And I have to imagine in the future, like in a more recent episode or on CBS Trek, they might have come from a different country. Or like you said, just Google something. There's other space programs.
Yeah, make up a global space force.
GASA.
Or whatever.
Global administration, yeah.
But listen, here's one thing I was hoping that it would kind of come up. So this gave me a little cool stab of nostalgia right at the beginning of the episode, because they hold up the space debris, right, with the U.S. flag and the NASA logo. It's the old NASA logo. It's the worm. Which they've just made this huge deal because, of course, they haven't been using that for many years. Yeah. And then I want to say one of the recent rockets or shuttles or something, they put the old worm logo back on. Yeah. So it's a little piece of nostalgia.
They bet on that and they got that one right. Fermat won, Star Trek won. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the fact that Data, well, first of all, he tells Data to summarize the book, and Data goes, okay, reads the whole book. I wish I could, when I saw that as a kid, I wished I could do that. But then Captain Picard, knowing that his away team is now somehow embroiled in the pages of a book, is like, well, I got to read this book. And of course he starts off and he's like, it's a dark and stormy night. Oh, this isn't good. We're not starting off here very well. And then later on, you hear him. I think he's like listening to it, and then he's listening to. Riker keeps his comm open, and so they're just listening to the action of the hotel. He's a spaceman from the future. Like, he is so bored with this, and Troy's listening too, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go to the bathroom," and she like never comes back. And it's just like the whole, there isn't really a B plot. It's just us reacting to these 24th century characters going, oh God, this is terrible.
Yeah, I did find that kind of interesting because there, like, nothing happens on the Enterprise, but it is there to serve as a form of, it's a form of narrator, isn't it? Because Troy is able to kind of say, oh, Riker's feeling blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's a way from them to cut away from the action and advance the plot whilst also like adding in basically a narrator voice. I thought it was really the first time I watched it, it was like, why are they doing this? Like, why are they bothered? They could have saved the salaries of Patrick Stewart.
Just let them off for the week.
Marina Sirtis. And yet actually, when I watched it again, it was like, oh, this is actually a really clever narrative trick to use because it allows them to do that and advance the plot when really, because the plot of the novel doesn't appear to actually be that deep.
No, a bellboy gets killed.
It's really just there's a girl.
Something
and
horrible probably
her.
happens to Vanessa, and
the plot of that's pretty shallow.
Yeah,
so
they do that thing that they do in a lot of early TNG, which I think of as just like, we paid for Riker, we're going to use him, like justifying the fact that he leads the away missions and not Kirk, where he'll just dictate what's going on. So we get a lot of low angle shots of Picard going, "What do you see down there?" And they're like, you wouldn't believe it, so we have a little bit of that. And then in the first part of the episode, you've got Geordi and Wesley working on the communications, and Picard will just stop by and go, "All right, nerds, what do you got? Like, let me know how we're working on that."
I was thrilled to see Wesley there, getting a little screen time for Will Wheaton, just basically going, we can't get in touch with them, Captain. That's pretty much what he was doing.
Yeah.
Lasky was in it too.
Yes.
For like a second. It's like they got everybody on set.
For a second. I can't remember. There was, maybe it's a different episode. I just watched this episode and I can't remember, but there is a scene where Pulaski they're trying to get these the away team out of wherever they are, and she says we could pop the bubble or whatever with the phasers and they would be frozen and I might be able to revive them. Is that this episode? Did I just? Yeah. Oh, it is? Okay.
Because they're trying to figure out how to get out, and they're like, so listen, we can do this, and we can get you out.
We'll flash freeze them and then heat them up in the microwave, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was around the same time that Mickey D arrives, and then they watch him leave, and Riker's like, I've got an idea.
Yeah, don't do that. Just wait on that, and then we're going to try this other thing. Yeah. Yeah, I really like Pulaski, and nobody has yet picked an episode that's a real Pulaski banger that I've been able to talk about how I think she got a bad rap.
I'm sorry. You said banger, and I'm like, she banged Riker's dad.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, there's a sticker.
Somebody picked that episode. What is it?
I can't remember the episode. It's the one with Riker's dad, isn't it?
Okay.
But there's have you ever heard of the podcast Women at Warp?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So they have these stickers, and years ago, they had these stickers that say "Never forget Pulaski banged Riker's dad," and it's like a really funny like cartoon on it. And I have one somewhere. It's one of my prized possessions because I think it's hilarious. So that happened in one episode. You should push that on your next guest and be like, I know we said we were going to let you choose, but we're not.
Guess what? And that's the one where they do the American Gladiators fight too, right?
Yeah. Okay. The Anbo Jitsu.
Yeah, right. I'll just hand somebody a Puji stick and be like, let's do this thing. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about this episode as we wind down here?
Something that was incongruous, but I absolutely loved. So there was a tonal shift right at the end, like from the time that Riker goes, "I've got it." They go over and they start playing craps. They just have fun for the whole rest of the episode. Yeah, and I love it.
Yeah.
With Data, weighting the dice, and then he's like baby needs a new pair of shoes. I'm like, where did he even get that
I
from?
know.
Like,
he read the book.
like all of a sudden he's like he goes from I'm going to be Data right now, and then all of a sudden he's like high roller and all on top of it, and Riker's there buying drinks for everyone and just loving every second of it. And Worf is there looking confused like he always does whenever anybody has fun. And it was just like that whole like that downward slide from the point where you know that they've come up with the solution, they just have to execute it. That whole part of the episode was just so enjoyable to watch.
It goes pretty smooth, and it's really, really fun. I just feel like they're at that point in the writing of the episode, they must have been like, all right, it's Act 5, we got 8 minutes, let's just get rid of this here, let's just have some fun. Yeah,
and it just feels good. By the time you leave that episode, by the time you exit out of it, you're like, yeah, I love Star Trek.
Can we come back to the Hotel Royale? Yeah, can we do it again? What if there was it's Planet Holodeck. It only plays one program, but you go there, and as long as you make a bunch of money, you can get out.
I feel like that's been done. Like, I feel like that's an actual thing somewhere. I'm gonna have to think on that, because that's just a great idea. Start selling tickets.
Yeah, right.
Especially if it's the thing where the aliens actually aren't there and it's just sort of on autopilot. It's like the 24th century version of an escape room.
Yeah, right. That's perfect. Yeah. Have you ever done an escape room?
No. I've done like the games, like the apps. That's fun. Escape room, like an actual physical one, sounds like the worst thing I can imagine.
I feel the same way, but now that I think about it, it's just an early holodeck. So here's to hating the holodeck in the future, I guess. Yeah. Well, now that we're at the end of the episode, let's talk My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
I'm gonna spoiler from Picard, sure. But my favorite captain is gonna be Captain Riker.
Oh, okay, sure.
Which, no, to be fair, before that, I would have been Captain Picard, hands down.
Sure, but now it's Captain Riker.
Now it's Captain Riker, because look at him.
For his rakish mien, or for any particular qualities.
It's so I talk about this at length at every opportunity I possibly can. No, everything about Riker is absolutely perfect. He's because he's good looking and he's smooth, but he's actually incredibly competent. Yeah. I actually think he makes a really, really good first officer to Picard's captain. I think that the pair of them as captain and first officer is great. I completely 100% believe that he stayed as a first officer when he could have been promoted, because he probably, like, in his job, he probably makes a better first officer than a captain. Yeah. But yeah, it's I just loved seeing him at, in the captain's chair on the bridge of the Zhenghe.
Yeah, it's also the best job in Starfleet, or it's the best ship in Starfleet. And if you're going to get your own ship, whether it's the Titan or whatever they're offering him, you're going to go from like being in the passenger seat of a Ferrari to like being, driving a Toyota Tercel or something like that. And then you have to work your way up all over again. So, yeah, I mean, he's on the Enterprise. Hang out for a few years. Yeah. Although I pity his first officer, though, because nobody's going to be good enough. He's always going to be like, well, you should do this. Like when I was on the Enterprise, I did this.
I was way better than you.
Yeah, we never did it like that. But okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Actually, I honestly don't think he would do, actually, because he always struck me. They wrote him as a leader, as a he's like a C-suite manager. He's not a CEO, but he's actually a really competent leader. And I always loved the scenes when they'd have him and Counselor Troy doing like staff reviews. Like, that's such a normal thing for them to be doing. And I always got the feeling they always wrote him in a way that seemed like he would be very sympathetic and empathetic towards his staff and actually looked after them. So yeah, I don't think except for the bit he was one of the ones that called broccoli all the time.
Broccoli, well, that's what they said. Yeah,
but then that episode was a little incongruous for that, because I really don't believe any of them would have called him broccoli. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I love that part in Tapestry where in the alternate reality where Picard is a lowly like menial, and he's like, do you really want this job? Maybe there's something that we can find for you that's better. I don't think you're command material, but keep doing what you're doing. Well, now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a commission and the rank of ensign. What department on the ship do you work in?
Can I do whatever Wesley Crusher did when he was an ensign? Helmsman.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's like where the action is. but you don't like you can make all the faces you want because you're facing away from everything that's happening.
Yes, right.
But you get to be like right up there and you get to see all the action that's going on the screen, but you can, you're like in it, but you're away from it.
You're kind of chief quip officer too, from Sulu to Geordi to Paris. You're the guy that gets to go.
Detmer.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You're the person that gets to go, I don't want one of those, or, whatever it is when you see something on the screen. Yeah. All right. Well, perfect. Helmsman. Awesome. Ensign Pitt, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
The best place to go is dailystartreknews.com. It's got links to all of the various social media profiles on there for the podcast Daily Star Trek News. I am at Astra1930 on all of the socials as well. So if you want to follow me, you can do that. Although I think it's a big web. Like if you go to dailystartreknews.com and you click through to Twitter, you can find, I have my other handle there. You'll find me.
Sure.
Also AlisonPitt.com. So
oh, right.
That's got links back. I've got my own little World Wide Web. So
wow. And
it's hard to miss me.
And Daily Star Trek News is available on all major listening platforms.
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, people check that out. And thanks again for joining me.
And YouTube.
And we're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.
Your Honor, a courtroom is a crucible. In it we burn away irrelevancies until we are left with a pure product, the truth, for all time.
Oh man, this is so intense. Data's on trial for his life.
I know. This episode, The Measure of a Man, is based on the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision of 1857.
And every week on Backtracking, we take a look at the real-world events that inspired classic Star Trek episodes. Sorry.
Shut up!
Shh.
Who are you?
We're the hosts of Backtracking. I'm Caliban.
You will both be taken to the brig and from there to the nearest starbase, where you will answer charges for what you have done.
And I'm Gooey Fame.
This is not a game. This is life and death.
You can follow us on Twitter.
Backtracking is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
You go f*** yourself.